ever gnawing, ever groaning. Within every human is the capacity to do great harm. Though humanity is inherently good, we are marred with a propensity towards evil. All too often, the way of life quickly causes us to turn wicked. Hatred, bitterness, depression, addiction, selfishness, mental illness, apathy. There exists not one human who is not at war with themselves. It may come in vastly different forms and intensities, but we all are afflicted, sometimes brought on by our own decisions, and sometimes of no fault of our own. We are all imperfect, and because of this, one of humanity's greatest longings has been that of peace. But even if we were to dismantle the powers that oppress and make paradise on earth, it would matter little if hell reigns in our hearts. To start, I would like to examine this concept portrayed in a story. We'll be starting with Berserk, a gruesome tale of a man named Guts who struggles against fate. Viewer disclaimer: this story is not for the faint of heart and can be found very disturbing. I will try my best to gloss over some details, but just viewer be advised. Guts was a boy born from a hanged woman somewhere near a battlefield. He was chanced upon by a traveling mercenary company, of which a camp prostitute would adopt him as her own. While already a tragic and less than ideal upbringing, things would take a turn for the worse, and his adopted mother would soon die of disease. The leader of the group, Gambino, would decide to make use of a child Guts by roughly training him to be a soldier and forego anything like compassion or care. His now father-like figure would go on to abuse Guts and even sell him to be used by one of the men in the camp. One thing would lead to another, and Guts would find himself being hunted down by his former home after accidentally killing Gambino in self-defense. After barely escaping alive, Guts would go on to live a life of warfare, drifting from battlefield to battlefield, doing the only thing he had ever known. It is around this time that the effects of Guts' traumatic upbringing had begun to manifest in harmful behaviors. He had begun to act reckless, being treated as if he was disposable and of little value. That is also how he lived. Fighting with abandon to self-care, and with thoughts such as, if I die, then it was just my time. He also became extremely adverse to human relationships and touch. Understandable that he would only find comfort in his sword, which he could control, rather than in man's hand, which had only harmed him. To speed up the plot, Guts would eventually join the Band of the Hawk, a mercenary group led by Griffith. Here he would begin the process of learning what friendship, vulnerability, love, and honorable self-sacrifice were. Things were looking up for Guts. He had found a place of belonging, people to help him overcome the scars of the past and grow as an individual. Unfortunately, the story only starts there, and much like for many of us, this good thing was brought to a terrible end. Griffith, the man closest to Guts and his shining light, would go on to betray the Band of the Hawk. To skip over the grisly details, essentially Griffith sacrificed his comrades and friends to be eaten by terrifying demons in exchange for otherworldly powers, in order that he may bring his own dream of everlasting peace to fruition. But as beyond hypocritical as that is, he also sinned against Guts further by taking advantage of Casca, the woman whom Guts learned how to love by. Either by sheer luck or willpower, Guts and Casca would be the only survivors of this massacre. However, as you can imagine, their lives would be unquestionably damaged to an extreme extent. Casca would go into a near catatonic state due to the trauma. As for Guts, he would begin his descent into a living hell in his vendetta to kill Griffith for his atrocity. At this point, I am sure you can sympathize with Guts. If anyone had a justification for anger and distrust, it would be him. Childhood abuse and neglect, a life of war, betrayal to the greatest extent, the loss of friends and his love greatly damaged, down an arm and an eye. How could someone recover from such pain? Guts would embrace the pain and let vengeance consume him. He would leave Casca behind in her vulnerable state and hunt down demons who he hoped would lead him to his prey. 2 points of lore. During the sacrifice, everyone was branded with a seal upon their flesh. This tangible brand marks a person for demons. The thing about these demons is, even one is enough to take on whole battalions of troops, some even armies. This means that every night, Guts would have to fight for his life against eldritch abominations. Every night. Isolated, alone, bloody, ragged, chained by his trauma in a very literal sense. Moved on only by vengeance, he would become a callous, cold monster of a man, only caring about revenge and nothing else, indifferent to the sufferings of others, forgetting even Casca. On his hellbound path, he would lead towns into destruction by his actions. He would taunt those that suffered, even telling a newly orphaned little girl to kill herself. His philosophy was that those who were weak deserved to die and shouldn't complain. Guts would encounter Griffith during this time. Consumed with rage, he attacked, but was completely powerless, dismissed like a bothersome fly, showing that all his efforts, all his rage, have largely been in vain this whole time. Skipping the plot even further forward, eventually Guts would be put on a journey to find and save the mentally handicapped Casca, who he had abandoned for 2 years. But after these 2 years of bloodshed, his psyche has taken on an almost tangible presence, akin to schizophrenia. It nudges him on to give in to his feral nature, to kill and be lost in rage. It even begins to mock or perhaps tempt him by saying that he could end up becoming a monster just like Griffith in due time. Robbed of a mother's love at birth, left to drown in blood, he was to die among corpses, meant to be consumed in a cesspool of despair, born to die as a waste of air, raised a child abandoned by fate, given to a life of violence, rage incarnate. Now, I very much doubt anyone watching this video has a comparable life story with demons and sacrifices. But as I said in the beginning, we all have a similar battle as Guts. There are beasts which are forced onto us. Childhood trauma, betrayals, disappointments, burdensome expectations, rage. It is in all of us in some form or another. And through Berserk, we can see that internal battle can be just as devastating as the external. When we feed the beast within, we become twisted shades of ourselves. Virtue is transformed into malice, peace into war. Wounds untreated and left to fester can soon corrupt the whole. A seed of bitterness planted by the harmful words of a friend can grow and reap fruits of hatred. Hatred, given to, leads to violence. Violence to death. Doubtful that this results in a physical death, but it will be the death of something. Perhaps your ability to trust and connect with others. Some of us are born with a beast. I personally have struggled with depression since I was a youth. Rationally, I should not have had much reason to despair. Be that as it may, I was still infected with this gnawing of the mind and soul. This disease that sought to conceal joy, criticize my hope and purpose, to sap my will. If given into, which I have done, I become a shell of a man, bound to my bed in darkness, awaiting the release of death. And some of us cultivate a beast by ourselves. Sometimes by foolishness or recklessness, we feed it until we lose control and it turns its fangs on us. A look at a pornographic photo as a teen can turn into a relentless addiction, which becomes increasingly perverse, ruining a man's perception of others and corrupting all his relationships. The desire to numb the pain by outside means, such as drugs, alcohol, gambling, or sex, can turn it into a tyrant over your will, making you give in to every urge, no matter the increasing cost. Losing your will to the beast strips you of your personal agency and leaves you as a spectator in your own body. What to do? How does one begin to fight this internal battle? There are several ways to make progress. Some are more important than others, depending on the condition. The first step is a change of mindset, for it doesn't matter what you try if you remain a slave in your heart. If you believe you cannot overcome, then you will not. What you believe about yourself is like a rudder to a ship. It guides the rest of your body. True change starts in the mind. These strongholds of lies built in the mind will continue to poison your thoughts until they are thoroughly dealt with. But you can't simply get rid of them. You must replace them with strongholds of truth. For it is the truth that will set you free. I do not have to be bitter. I can be joyful. I do not have to drink. I can be sober. I do not have to be addicted. I can be free. Of course, only changing your internal perception is often not enough. A renewed mindset must be backed up by action. Take tangible steps against the beast within. If it's pornography, get an old flip phone and download accountability apps on your devices that block explicit content. If it's alcohol, then refuse to be in its very presence. Jesus has a saying that goes something like this: if your eye causes you to stumble, then pluck it out. If your arm causes you to sin, then cut it off. Better to be saved missing an eye than go to hell whole. The moral of the paraphrase, it's better to lose in the pursuit of fighting off your addiction than wait while it takes more and more and more from you. But so few of us can take these tangible steps on our own will. And some beasts don't have such tangible steps to even take. That is where vulnerability comes in. A change of mindset, tangible steps, and then outside help See it as a sickness. Some illnesses go away on their own. Some take a little bit of medicine that you can administer yourself. But when you get really sick, you have to go see someone else to help you, a doctor. The same goes for these illnesses of the heart and mind. Professional help alongside a strong interpersonal support group can do a world of good. Fighting alone is almost impossible, but fighting with an army makes the enemy shake. See a psychiatrist, therapist, priest, or pastor, professionals trained to help you win the fight. Bring your friends and family alongside to support you. Have someone to call during those sleepless nights or when the urges threaten to overtake you. If you believe you can overcome, you take every opportunity to win, and you have fighters at your side. Victory is within sight, though the battle may last longer than we would wish. Remember Guts, Rage incarnate? He slowly began to heal from the beast within. He did so through being vulnerable and allowing others to come into his life again, by redirecting his anger for revenge to instead be strength in order to protect. Instead of dwelling on all he had lost, he began to focus on cherishing what he had now. But his darkness had gone very deep, and so he had to remain vigilant on himself, lest he fall back into old ways and destroy that which he now found precious. The beast may never disappear, but it can be subdued with this vigilance. And maybe, one day, far off, it will turn to vapor and blow away with the winds. Another figure we can look at would be Thorfinn from Vinland Saga. His inner beast was not a temptation, but a chain of guilt. Overwhelming regret for his past life of violence. He was a man who gave in to the beast within for most of his life, and all that left him was a trail of blood, a mountain of corpses, and broken families. And a void where his heart once laid. Every shred of purpose or meaning snuffed from his eyes. This guilt had transformed him into a dead man walking. Can any of you relate? He had convinced himself that he had no right to live and that there was no meaning to it. What changed? It was the realization that though he carried innumerable sins, he had no right to throw away his life. It was his duty to make the world a better place so that no one would have to suffer pain that he had endured or the pain he had inflicted. He had a duty to all those he had hurt to labor towards making paradise. And so he resolved himself and spoke those profound words. I have no enemies. What can we take from this? What we can realize, like Thorfinn, is this. Regardless of what you've done, how far you've fallen, or how lost you are, your life has meaning. That guilt that chains you down is a temptation that must be resisted. You may bear failure, regret, or sins, but you must bear those moving forward. You have a duty towards others, towards yourself, towards God, to do good and build a paradise. I promise you, peace is given to the repentant, but is denied to those who wallow in their despair. This is illustrated greatly in the biblical story. Judas, a disciple of Jesus, betrayed him over to those that sought to kill him for only a few pieces of silver. Peter, another of Jesus' disciples, denied ever have knowing his Lord 3 times when questioned. Both of them betrayers. The difference? Overwhelmed with guilt, Judas hung himself, and his story ends there. Peter, whose story very well could have ended the same way, on the other hand, sought forgiveness from Jesus after his resurrection. Out of his guilt came repentance, and from that repentance, he would go on to be one of the greatest saints in history. The beast within all of us is like a crouching lion, waiting to tear us down. Vice and sorrow. Pride, greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth. But when resisted, humanity can shine beyond all measure. When the beast is replaced with chastity, temperance, charity, diligence, patience, kindness, and humility, we can live as we were made to be, good.